In 1874, the painter Giuseppe De Nittis was invited by Edgar Degas, his mentor and friend, to exhibit as the only Italian, together with his companions Monet, Renoir, Pissarro, and Berthe Morisot, at Nadar's studio, as the first exhibition of their group, to exhibit together. The gallery space belonged to a man named Nadar. Who is Nadar, you ask? Why is he important? Looking at the life of a truly extraordinary, multi-talented 19th century Frenchman, whose name was actually Gaspard Félix Tournachon, you may never have heard of. Born in 1820 in Paris and using the pseudonym of Nadar, he would become a prolific French caricaturist and writer, the most famous photographer of his era, a national hero for his ballooning exploits, an inveterate innovator and friend of the impressionists, a flamboyant showman which was reflected in his extraordinary appearance. He was memorably described as a sort of giant, a figure with immensely long legs, exceedingly long arms, extensive torso, and on top of all this a head of blazing red hair, surmounted by a pair of large, intelligent, darting eyes, full of wild lights. He seemed to know everyone who was somebody in Paris. He once claimed that he knew 10,000 people, and doubtless this claim is not as exaggerated as it first sounds. So it is to Nadar that we may owe some debt of recognition, as having the brave and unreserved nature to bring about the first real recognition to the future impressionists. De Nittis was from a wealthy family. His grandfather was an architect, and had a much older brother who largely looked after him. Shortly after his birth, his father was arrested on political grounds, so it was to the eldest son to help the family. The elder brother, Vincenzo De Nittis, succumbed to the attraction of the capital of Naples to settle as a stockbroker. He left his native Barletta for it, and brought with him his two younger brothers, Carlo and Giuseppe, to whom he acted as guardian, and for whom he always showed a caring, truly paternal tenderness. While he obtained the former's admission into the military college, he tried to make up for the sporadic and incomplete education Giuseppe had received up until then by entrusting him to a whole host of professors, among whom, as a drawing teacher, was Vincenzo da Toli. Giuseppe, or rather Peppino, as he was always called by relatives and friends, even when he left Italy and settled definitively in Paris. Giuseppe De Nittis studied for a time in Barletta under Giovanni Battista Callot. He also attended Mancinelli's evening life classes, influenced by Adriano Secchioni. In 1863, De Nittis formed the Scuola di Resina with Marco de Gregorio and Federico Rossano, a group that sought to approach nature with an innovative directness. De Nittis was particularly concerned with capturing the light and atmospheric colour, and in making numerous studies of the land, trees, and clouds. Travelling to Paris in 1867, De Nittis met Jean-Léon Gérôme and Jean-Louis Ernest Maisonnier, and the following year he made the city his permanent home. The profound training he was subject to, along with the rising movements all a-bustle in the capital, made his journey a positive one. From 1869 to 70, he painted several canvases in the manner of Meissonier, but he also continued to pursue landscapes and fashionable subjects. He experimented with etching, dry point, and lithography. From the 1870s, De Nittis painted exquisite views of modern-day Paris, showing stylish women riding or walking about with children and their pets, so it was by befriending Degas that he was urged to contribute to the first Impressionist exhibition. In a letter to a friend, De Nittis recounted his first foray into the Parisian capital, hoping to find an acquaintance he knew of, but was not to be found, as he later recalls. I was eager to strike out for France. Therefore, in the summer of 1867, after having exhibited and sold some tiny canvases in Naples and Palermo, in Rome and also Florence, and after having gone at a rapid pace as far as Venice and had made contact with a generous admirer of Vittore Carpaccio, who helped him and took advantage of the nest egg provided of 500 lire that his earnings and his savings had allowed him to put aside to make the great decision to go to France, although was ignorant of the language and knew no one there. Having stopped in Turin and taken lodging in a rather dubious inn, some pickpockets, true artists of their kind, as he later pleased to define them, with an indulgent smile, stole 2/3 of his modest fortune, so that he was forced to turn to his brothers to ask them for a little more money. With the 150 lire that he obtained, and with the other 150 that remained in his purse, Giuseppe De Nittis, having paid the Turin hotelier's bill and purchased a third-class ticket, got on the train headed towards the capital of France. Beside himself with joy at having finally reached the point of being able to satisfy perhaps the most ardent of his desires, during the 20-odd hours of the journey he was unable to stay still in his place, and, as if to calm his agitation, he exclaimed suddenly, in a soft, low voice, turning to himself, "Yes, I'm going to Paris. I'll be there soon. I'll have lunch there tonight." Of the first hours of exaltation and depression spent in the city that was destined to bring him glory, money, and happiness, and which he, for his part, had to prefer over all the others, here is, more or less, the story told by himself, a long time later and in a moment of expansion, to a very dear friend. As soon as I got off the train, I looked for an omnibus that would take me straight to the Montparnasse Square. I had been assured, before I left Italy, that a Neapolitan sculptor, whom I had met some time ago, lived in the vicinity of that square. But, for lack of anything better, I hoped to find him again, and to be advised and guided by him in my first days of Parisian life. Having reached my destination, from the top of the bus roof I was thrown down hastily and without any consideration, in addition to my small trunk of a modest third-class traveller, having the large paint-box of a painter seeking his fortune in a foreign land, and, as it fell to the ground, it opened, scattering brushes and tubes of paint all around. Finally, I entered a hotel that was indicated to me as not far away. Having secured a small room in the attic, that only my very poorly stocked wallet would allow me, I hurried to go up there and lie down on the bed. It was a grey, sultry summer day, and the pale light fading from a narrow courtyard fell on my face from the top of a small window. Then, thinking of finding myself in a completely unknown city, without having any connection with it, without bringing with me any commendations, without even knowing the language spoken there, I felt an immense discouragement attack me. However, tiredness prevailed, and I soon fell fast asleep. When I woke up, the sun had dropped to the horizon, and I felt the sting of hunger inside me. I therefore immediately started looking for a place where I could eat, and managed to discover a kind of café where I had the unpleasant surprise of being presented with a bill of 7 lire for a fairly meagre lunch. Having gone out into the open air again, I walked in front of me a bit at random, until, after having walked through an intricate maze of streets, I found myself in the middle of the Boulevard des Italiens. It was there that, amid the incessant coming and going of men, women, and vehicles of every kind, in all that noisy and feverish movement, in the demonic life of the Parisian crowd under the gaslight, the sudden black mood that had taken hold of me vanished as if by magic, and I felt seduced, exalted, thrilled by the modernity of the wonderful spectacle that presented itself to my gaze for the first time. A few days after his arrival, a warm letter from a friend received in Paris connected De Nittis with the painter Edouard Brandon, who, in addition to being esteemed for his uncommon skill in portraying the interiors of synagogues on canvas, was very well liked for the affability of his character. Brandon made the introduction to Jérôme, and he, in turn, gave me a note of introduction to Meissonier. In those years, around 1870, De Nittises became better established and found a house in Paris that was eventually to become the general meeting place for artists, writers, poets, and intellectuals of the time. By 1878, the artist received a gold medal at the Universal Exhibition and the Légion d'honneur. It is interesting to note here that De Nittis was offered a studio space with Meissonier after reviewing his portfolio, along with the proposal of assisting him with the landscape portions of Meissonier's paintings. It was a tempting offer, but a life-changing moment to make and define one's real aims and natural abilities so very delicately. De Nittis declined and chose to take the advice of his old colleague from Italy to be yourself, first because you don't need it, then because it is against our principles. Paint what your heart tells you, and a wise choice it was. The strong independence of his character, the flexible range of his choices, and the repulsion for all eccentricity, there were many obstacles to the continued enlistment of De Nittis in the ranks of his impressionist friends. In fact, he only exhibited with them once, although he continued, on his own and with ever greater commitment and passion, to study the complex problems of light and atmospheric transparency in relation to painting and a commitment to them, despite some of the temporary differences with the Impressionist brand. He made the personal acquaintance of a banker, several times a millionaire, Mr. K. Knowles, who, taken with great admiration for the artist and with a deep sympathy for the man, entrusted him the task of carrying out, in 4 years and for the total sum of 200,000 lire, 10 paintings with London subjects. He returned to France, happy and proud to be able to repeat the classic Veni, Vidi, Vici, in English I came, I saw, I conquered, for his voyage of exploration. He took the first opportunity that presented itself to make his way to England, where he then got into the habit of spending 1 or 2 months each year, preferably during the social and sporting season, in which London life displays itself to foreigners with all its attractions. Above all, however, it was the elegant and lively grace of his luminous and lively scenes of modern life that was worth it, whose unusual and clear originality could not fail to make an impression, if not for reasons of contrast, in a country in which painting was dominated by history, thanks to Watts, Leighton, Burne-Jones, Millais, Alma-Tadema, and their followers, had for some 20 years or more been completely invaded by mythological, legendary, or allegorical subjects, so far from everyday reality. De Nittis, for his part, deeply felt the severe, grandiose, and melancholic charm of London, the turbulent life of its population through the veils of fog and under the grey, heavy skies, in which the sun appears seldom, all to his fancy. Finally, it seems that it can be stated that Giuseppe De Nittis was able to conquer a place among Impressionist painters not very dissimilar to that which, amid Naturalist painters, and similar to them in many respects, occupied the same love for contemporary life with the audacity of the realistic, restrained by an innate sense of grace, delicacy, and elegance. In 1884, just as De Nittis was at the height of his artistic journey, he was struck with health issues and passed suddenly at the age of 38 of a stroke, leaving behind his widow and small son. The grandeur of the funeral was matched by the eloquence of the unanimous commemoration of De Nittis by the French press, with a whole series of long articles, which were echoed by the English, German, Spanish, and American newspapers. Giuseppe De Nittis was an original, and his work is a testimony to his diligence and single-mindedness in portraying everyday life around him with honesty and truth. Lastly, we hope you enjoyed this look at the life of a remarkable talent, and while we were able to secure many of his works by way of reproduction, we know many more masterpieces are yet to be discovered. So thank you to our subscribers, and remember to leave a like to help the channel. We have many more great talents to share, so until next time, bye for now.